I never thought I'd be the guy telling one of these stories. You know the type, the poor sucker who discovers his girlfriend has been cheating. But here I am, and trust me, my story is probably worse than most you've heard. My name is Daniel, and until 3 months ago, I thought I had a pretty good life. I had a decent job as a graphic designer at a mid-sized marketing agency. The pay wasn't spectacular, but it was enough. I had a beautiful girlfriend named Megan who I'd been with for almost 4 years. We lived together in a surprisingly nice apartment in an area of the city we normally couldn't afford, and therein lies the beginning of this nightmare. About a year and a half ago, we were looking for a new place. Our previous apartment was small, outdated, and in a less than ideal neighborhood. We had been saving up, but real estate in our city is brutal. Anything decent was way out of our price range. Then Megan found this listing online. A 2-bedroom apartment in Westridge Heights, an upscale area where young professionals and wealthy families live. The place had hardwood floors, stainless steel appliances, a balcony with a city view, and even a small home office space that would be perfect for my freelance work. The kicker, it was listed at about 30% below market value for that neighborhood. This has to be a scam, I told Megan when she showed me the listing. There's no way a place like this goes for that price in that area. Megan insisted we at least check it out. Maybe the owner just wants reliable tenants quickly, she suggested. Or maybe there's something wrong with it that isn't in the photos. So we went to see it. The landlord, Mr. Richard Cooper, met us there personally. He was probably in his late 30s, tall, well-dressed in what I'd guess was a custom-tailored suit. He had this confidence about him, the kind that comes from old money and privilege. He mentioned he owned several properties around the city and that this particular building was one of his newer acquisitions. The apartment was even better than the pictures. Spacious, modern, recently renovated. We fell in love with it immediately. When I cautiously asked about the surprisingly low rent, Mr. Cooper, or Rich as he insisted we call him, gave us some story about preferring reliable long-term tenants over maximizing profit. I've had too many wealthy tenants who trash the place or leave after 6 months, he explained smoothly. I'd rather have good people who'll take care of it and stay a while, even if it means charging a bit less. It made sense at the time. Some landlords do prefer stability over squeezing every penny out of their properties, and Megan was so excited about the place that I pushed my suspicions aside. We signed a 2-year lease that day. The first year in that apartment was amazing. Megan and I both loved the place. We were within walking distance of great restaurants and shops. The neighbors were friendly professionals. My commute was cut in half, and the home office space allowed me to take on more freelance projects, which helped our finances. Rich was surprisingly hands-on for a landlord who owned multiple properties. If anything broke, he'd often come fix it himself rather than sending a maintenance person. He was always friendly, asking about our jobs and lives. I thought we were just lucky to have a good landlord who cared about his property and tenants. Sometimes he'd stay a bit longer after fixing something, chatting with us, mostly with Megan, actually. I didn't think much of it at the time. Megan has always been outgoing and friendly, the type who can chat easily with anyone. I assumed she was just being nice to our landlord, keeping a good relationship with him. There were a few small things that, in retrospect, should have been red flags. Occasionally, Rich would text Megan directly about apartment stuff rather than contacting both of us. When I asked about it, Megan said she'd given him her number as the primary contact since my work schedule was less predictable. Made sense. Sometimes Rich would drop by unannounced when I wasn't home. Megan would mention it casually. Oh, Rich stopped by to check the water pressure, or Rich came to look at that loose floorboard. Again, I didn't think much of it. He was a surprisingly attentive landlord, and that seemed like a good thing. One time I came home early from work and found Rich leaving our apartment. He seemed startled to see me. Hey Daniel, just checked out that leaky faucet Megan mentioned, he said, recovering quickly. What leaky faucet? I asked, confused. I hadn't noticed any issues. In the master bathroom, Megan jumped in, appearing behind him in the doorway. It was making that dripping sound at night, remember? I mentioned it last week. I didn't remember any dripping, but I had been working late on a big project, so I figured I might have been too tired to notice or had forgotten her mentioning it. About 6 months ago, things started to change subtly. Megan began paying more attention to her appearance, new clothes, spending more time on her hair and makeup. She said she was just trying to make more effort at work, aiming for a promotion. Again, seemed reasonable. She also started having girls' nights more frequently. Usually once a week, sometimes twice. I was supportive. Everyone needs time with their friends, right? She'd come home late, sometimes smelling faintly of alcohol, but never obviously drunk. When I'd ask about her night, she'd give vague answers about just drinks and gossip without many specifics. One night, I called her around 10 p.m. during one of these girls' nights because I couldn't find the charger for my laptop. The background was quiet, too quiet for a bar or restaurant. When I mentioned this, she quickly said they'd gone back to her friend Jessica's apartment. I didn't think much of it at the time. A week later, I ran into Jessica at the grocery store. I mentioned that it was nice she and Megan were spending more time together. Jessica looked confused. What do you mean? I haven't seen Megan in months. We keep trying to schedule something, but she's always busy. My stomach dropped. I played it off, saying I must have misunderstood who Megan was going out with. But that was the moment the first real seed of doubt was planted. When I got home, I casually asked Megan how Jessica was doing. Without missing a beat, she launched into a story about Jessica's problems with her boyfriend. She lied so smoothly, so effortlessly that it was chilling. I didn't confront her, not yet. I needed to know more. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I felt I had no choice. I started paying closer attention to Megan's schedule, noting when she said she was going out and with whom. I checked her social media to see if any photos appeared from these girls' nights. None did. I also started coming home from work at random times, but never caught anything suspicious. If Megan was cheating, she wasn't doing it in our apartment, at least not when I might reasonably come home. Then came the financial discrepancy. We had separate bank accounts but a joint account for rent and utilities. One month, I noticed Megan's contribution to the rent was about $300 less than usual. When I asked her about it, she seemed flustered. "Oh, I must have made a mistake. I'll transfer the rest right away." But this happened again the next month, and the next, each time with a different excuse. One time she accidentally transferred money to her savings instead. Another time she claimed there had been an issue with her paycheck. I started wondering if the reduced rent had anything to do with Rich. Was he giving Megan some kind of discount? But why? And why wouldn't she tell me about it? The breakthrough came about 2 months ago. Megan had left for work in a hurry and asked me to email her a document from her laptop. She gave me her password and said the file was on her desktop. I found the file easily enough, but as I was about to close the laptop, a notification popped up. A new email from R. Cooper with the subject line, "Looking forward to Wednesday." I shouldn't have opened it, I knew that, but I did. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." Same time, same place. I've been thinking about last week all day. You drive me crazy, you know that? R. My hands were shaking as I clicked on the email thread. The previous exchanges were just as damning, explicit descriptions of their encounters. Plans for their next meetup, references to our special arrangement. In a daze, I opened her email folders. There was one labeled Rich that contained months of correspondence between them. It started innocuously enough, friendly exchanges about the apartment, maintenance requests. Then it evolved into flirtatious messages, then explicit ones. There were also references to their agreement. Apparently, Rich was taking $300 off our monthly rent in exchange for weekly meetings with Megan. But the worst part, the videos and photos. There was a folder in her document simply labeled R. I clicked on it and immediately wished I hadn't. Dozens of videos and hundreds of photos of Megan and Rich together, some taken in what was clearly his house, some in hotels, and some this made me physically sick in our apartment in our bed when I was at work or out of town. The timestamps showed this had been going on for over a year, almost since we moved in. The girls' nights were just a cover. Sometimes they weren't even going anywhere, she was just going to his place in the same building. I sat there for hours going through everything, emails, messages, photos, videos. With each one, my heart broke a little more. By the time Megan came home from work, I was emotionally exhausted. She knew something was wrong the moment she walked in. Her laptop was open on the coffee table. One of their emails was on the screen. "Daniel, I can explain," she started. "Explain what exactly?" My voice was eerily calm. "Explain how you've been sleeping with our landlord for a discount on rent. Explain how you've been lying to me for over a year. Explain the videos of you two in our bed." She started crying, those tears that had always melted my heart before. "Not this time. It wasn't supposed to be anything serious," she sobbed. "It started as just flirting. He kept coming over when you weren't home, being so charming and attentive. So you decided to become a part-time prostitute for $300 a month off our rent. The words were cruel, but I was beyond caring at that point. Her face hardened at that. It wasn't like that. We had a connection. And yes, the discount was nice, but that's not why. Save it. I cut her off. I've read all your emails, seen all your videos. I know exactly what kind of connection you had. What followed was several hours of yelling, crying, accusations, and weak justifications. She tried everything, blaming me for not being attentive enough, blaming him for pursuing her, blaming financial stress for making her vulnerable to the arrangement. At one point, she even tried to turn it around on me, asking if I had ever been tempted to cheat. No, Megan, because unlike you, I actually loved and respected my partner. Past tense, we both caught it. By morning, the decision was made, she would move out. I would stay in the apartment until the lease was up in 6 months, then find a new place. I couldn't afford it alone at the full price, but I had some savings and could pick up extra freelance work, anything to not be homeless while dealing with this betrayal. Megan moved out the next day, going to stay with a friend, a real friend this time, not a cover for meeting Rich. She left most of the furniture since it was mine before we moved in together. She took her clothes, personal items, and of course her laptop. I expected to hear from Rich soon after, either gloating or threatening eviction. But there was nothing. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits. It was as if he had vanished. A week after Megan moved out, I ran into one of our neighbors in the elevator, an older woman named Mrs. Patel who lived down the hall. "I'm sorry about your girlfriend moving out," she said kindly. "I saw her with suitcases last week." "Breakups are hard." "Thank you," I replied, not wanting to get into the sordid details. "I must say, though, I won't miss her loud friend visits," Mrs. Patel continued, "especially that man who would come over so often when you were away, so inconsiderate with the noise." My heart sank. So the neighbors knew. Had everyone in the building been aware of what was happening except me? "Was it that obvious?" I asked weakly. Mrs. Patel patted my arm. "Only to those of us who are home during the day. Don't worry, dear, you're better off without someone who doesn't respect you." That conversation was humiliating, but it also gave me an idea. If other neighbors had noticed Rich and Megan's visits, maybe they had other information too. I started talking to more neighbors, cautiously at first. I didn't want to spread gossip or seem like I was obsessed with my ex's affair, but I needed information. From these conversations, I learned that Rich's visits to our apartment when I wasn't home had been frequent and regular, usually Wednesday afternoons, and sometimes Friday mornings when I had early client meetings. Several neighbors had seen them together around the building, sometimes acting intimately in the hallways or garage. One neighbor, a college student who worked from home, mentioned seeing them use the building's service elevator to avoid the main lobby. Another recalled hearing them arguing about a month ago, something about Rich not keeping his promises. But the most valuable information came from Trevor, the building's maintenance guy. We'd always been friendly, occasionally chatting when he came to fix things. When I ran into him in the parking garage, he seemed uncomfortable seeing me. "Hey man, I'm sorry about," he said awkwardly. "Word travels fast," I remarked. "Look, I should have said something," Trevor continued, looking guilty. "I saw them together all the time." But it wasn't my place to get involved in tenants' personal lives. I assured him I didn't blame him. Then, hesitantly, I asked if he knew anything else about Rich that might be helpful. Trevor looked around to make sure we were alone. "Rich isn't just your landlord. His family owns half the real estate development company that built this entire complex. His father is Craig Cooper of Cooper and Blackwell Developments." This was new information. Rich had presented himself as just a landlord who owned a few properties, not the son of a real estate mogul. "Also," Trevor lowered his voice further, "you're not the first. There's been at least 2 other guys in this building whose girlfriends had special arrangements with Rich. One moved out last year, the other happened before I started working here, but people still talk about it. So this is his pattern, move couples into his buildings and then go after the women." Trevor nodded grimly. "From what I've heard, yeah. He targets couples where he thinks the woman might be persuadable, offers them apartments at below market rates, then makes his move." This changed everything. What had felt like a personal betrayal now seemed like something bigger, a predatory pattern by someone abusing his position of power. Armed with this new perspective, I went back to the copies I'd made of Megan's emails and videos. I transferred everything to an external hard drive before confronting her, partly as evidence for myself that I wasn't crazy, partly out of a morbid need to understand the full extent of the betrayal. Looking at the correspondence again, I could see Rich's manipulation clearly. In the early emails, he was constantly complimenting Megan, telling her she deserved better than our struggling artist lifestyle. He emphasized how much money he had, the places he could take her, the things he could buy her. When she expressed guilt about our relationship, he'd minimize it. It's just some fun between friends, or what Daniel doesn't know won't hurt him, or think of it as a business arrangement that benefits everyone. There were also mentions of other women. In one email, he casually referenced another tenant who understood how the game is played. In another, he told Megan not to get clingy like Jessica did. These supported Trevor's claim that this was a pattern for Rich. The most damning evidence was a video where both Megan and Rich were visible, and he was explicitly stating their arrangement, $300 off the rent each month for weekly meetings. In the video, he even joked about how oblivious I was, saying, "Your boyfriend should thank me for the discount. Too bad he'll never know what a good deal he's getting." My lawyer friend Julian had told me once that New York, where we lived, was a one-party consent state for recordings. This meant that since Rich was clearly aware he was being recorded, he even looked directly at the camera at points. The video could potentially be legally damaging to him. I spent several days considering my options. I could just leave when the lease was up, try to put this all behind me. That would be the simplest approach. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Not just at Megan's betrayal, but at Rich's predatory behavior. How many relationships had he destroyed? How many people had he manipulated and exploited? I decided he needed to face consequences, but I needed to be smart about it. Rich was wealthy and connected. If I made accusations without solid evidence, he could destroy me legally. I needed leverage. First, I consulted with Julian without telling him the specifics. Hypothetically speaking, I asked, what would be the legal implications of a landlord who repeatedly offered rent discounts in exchange for sexual favors? Depending on the specifics, that could potentially involve several issues, Julian explained. Sexual harassment, prostitution, unfair housing practices, maybe even extortion if there was any threat of eviction involved, but you'd need very clear evidence. What about videos where the arrangement is explicitly stated? Julian looked at me suspiciously. That would be stronger. But be careful, if these videos were obtained illegally, they might not be admissible, and you could face countercharges. I assured him the videos were legally obtained, which was true. Megan had knowingly recorded them and left them on a laptop she had given me the password to. Next, I researched Cooper and Blackwell Developments. It was a major player in the city's real estate market, with projects worth hundreds of millions. Craig Cooper, Rich's father, was a prominent businessman who sat on several charity boards and had political aspirations. The company prided itself on its family values and ethical business practices. I also looked into Rich himself. On social media, he presented himself as a successful young real estate executive and philanthropist. His Instagram showed him at charity galas, business award ceremonies, and family events. There were even photos of him with a woman who appeared to be his girlfriend, a sleek, polished-looking corporate type. According to his LinkedIn, he was executive vice president of residential properties at his father's company. The hypocrisy was stunning. Here was a man presenting himself as a respectable business leader while systematically preying on women in his buildings. I decided on a multi-pronged approach. First, I compiled all the evidence, emails, videos, photos, dates, times, into a comprehensive document. I included statements from neighbors who had witnessed Rich's frequent visits. I wrote a detailed timeline of the affair and the rental arrangement. Then I drafted 3 letters. The first was to Craig Cooper, Rich's father and the CEO of Cooper and Blackwell. In it, I calmly and professionally outlined how his son had repeatedly used company properties to solicit sexual arrangements with female tenants. I included just enough evidence to make it clear I wasn't bluffing, but not the most explicit material. The second letter was to the board of the Urban Housing Ethics Committee, where Craig Cooper sat as a director. This letter was more formal, detailing how a senior executive at Cooper and Blackwell was engaged in unethical and potentially illegal housing practices. Again, I included supporting evidence. The third letter was to Rich himself. This one was more direct. Richard, I have comprehensive evidence of your arrangement with Megan, including videos where you explicitly state the terms. I also have documentation of your similar arrangements with other tenants in your buildings. I'm not interested in money. I want 3 things. 1. I will continue living in this apartment until the end of my lease at the discounted rate, without any contact from you. 2. You will provide written confirmation that my security deposit will be returned in full. 3. You will resign from your position at Cooper and Blackwell and seek professional help for your predatory behavior. If these conditions are not met, copies of all evidence will be sent to your father, the board members of all organizations you're affiliated with, your girlfriend, yes. I know about Stephanie and, if necessary, appropriate law enforcement agencies. You have 48 hours to respond. Daniel, I didn't send any of these letters immediately. First, I had everything reviewed by Julian, who was now fully in the loop and, frankly, appalled. He suggested some modifications to ensure I wasn't doing anything that could be construed as blackmail or extortion. The key, he explained, was that I wasn't demanding money or benefits beyond what I was already legally entitled to as a tenant. Once the letters were finalized, I sent Rich's via email with a few key video clips attached. Then I waited. Rich's response came just 3 hours later. A panicked email, "Daniel, let's talk about this in person. There's been a misunderstanding. I can explain everything. Please don't contact my father or anyone else. Name your price." I didn't respond. 12 hours later, another email, "I'll agree to your terms. You can stay in the apartment at the current rate. I'll sign whatever you want regarding the security deposit. But the resignation is impossible. This company is my life, my family's legacy. Please reconsider." Again, I didn't respond. Instead, I sent the letter to his father, along with a select few pieces of evidence. I also sent the letter to the ethics committee. The next day, my phone blew up with texts and calls from a number I didn't recognize. I assumed it was Rich. I blocked it. Then came an email from Megan. "Daniel, what the hell did you do? Rich is freaking out. He says you sent stuff to his dad. He's threatening to sue me now too. You had no right to do this." I almost laughed at the absurdity. I had no right. After what they had done, I replied simply, "Actions have consequences for both of you." Then came the truly surprising response. An email from Craig Cooper himself. "Mr. I received your letter and supporting documentation regarding my son's behavior. I would like to meet with you to discuss this matter in person. Please be assured that Cooper and Blackwell takes these allegations very seriously. If you're amenable, I can have my assistant arrange a meeting at your convenience. Regards, Craig Cooper, CEO, Cooper and Blackwell Developments." This I hadn't expected. I assumed Craig would either ignore me or have his lawyers threaten me. A meeting request was interesting. After consulting with Julian, who agreed to accompany me, I accepted. 2 days later, Julian and I sat in a conference room at the Cooper and Blackwell headquarters downtown. Craig Cooper entered precisely on time, accompanied by a woman he introduced as Miss Alvarez, the company's chief counsel. Craig Cooper was an imposing figure, tall like his son, but broader, with silver hair and the weathered face of someone who had worked his way up rather than been born into privilege. "Thank you for coming, mister," he began formally. "I want to start by saying how deeply disturbed I am by the information you provided. If what you've shown me is accurate, and I have no reason to doubt its authenticity, then my son has engaged in behavior that is not only unethical but potentially criminal." This was not what I had expected. I had anticipated denials, minimization, perhaps threats. "We've taken immediate action," Craig continued. "Richard has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. I've also initiated an audit of all properties he's managed, with particular attention to rental agreements and tenant complaints." Miss Alvarez spoke next. "From a legal standpoint, we want to be clear that the company was unaware of these activities. However, we take full responsibility for addressing them properly now that they've been brought to our attention." Craig looked at me directly. "Now, regarding your situation specifically, I understand you've been victimized here both personally and financially. While no amount of compensation can undo the harm caused, we would like to make things right to the extent possible." What followed was a surprisingly straightforward negotiation. By the end of the hour-long meeting, we had agreed to the following terms. 1. I could remain in my apartment rent-free until the end of the lease. 2. My security deposit would be returned immediately, plus an additional sum for inconvenience and distress. 3. When I did move out, the company would cover my moving expenses and 3 months' rent at a new place of my choosing. 4. In exchange, I would sign an NDA covering specific details of the affair. but which explicitly stated I was free to report any potentially criminal activity to authorities if I chose to. Julian reviewed everything carefully and confirmed it was a fair deal. We signed the agreements there in the conference room. As we were preparing to leave, Craig asked to speak to me alone for a moment. Julian stepped outside with Miss Alvarez. "Off the record," Craig said quietly, "I want to thank you for bringing this to me directly instead of going public immediately. Richard has issues that his mother and I have been in denial about for too long. This wasn't the first incident, but I promise you it will be the last. He's entering a residential treatment program tomorrow." I nodded, unsure what to say. "One more thing," Craig added. "Your ex-girlfriend has also been attempting to contact us. She's making claims that she was somehow coerced or manipulated. Based on the evidence you provided, that doesn't appear to be the case, just so you're aware." That sounded like Megan, always trying to make herself the victim even when she was clearly complicit. The weeks following the meeting were surprisingly peaceful. I received the agreed-upon payment. Rich disappeared from the building, from social media, from everywhere. According to building gossip, which Trevor kept me updated on, he had taken a leave of absence for personal reasons. Megan continued trying to contact me, alternating between angry accusations and tearful pleas for forgiveness. I blocked her on everything. About a month after the meeting, I received an unexpected email from Stephanie, Rich's girlfriend. She had somehow found my contact information. "I know we've never met, but I wanted to thank you. I was with Richard for 3 years and always suspected something was wrong. When his father finally told me what had been happening, it was devastating but also validating. I wasn't crazy after all. I've moved out and moved on. I hope you're finding some peace too." I was. The initial shock and pain of Megan's betrayal was fading. The apartment that had once felt tainted by their affair was becoming just a place again, a nice place where I could live comfortably while planning my next steps. The situation with Cooper and Blackwell was resolved to my satisfaction, but I still had evidence of potentially criminal behavior. After much consideration, I decided not to pursue legal action against Rich, not because he didn't deserve it, but because I wanted to move on with my life. The constant reliving of the betrayal through a lengthy legal process would only keep me trapped in the past. It's been 3 months now since everything came to light. I still live in the apartment, though I'll be moving when the lease ends in 3 months. Not because I have to, but because I want a fresh start. Megan finally stopped trying to contact me after I had Julian send her a cease and desist letter. Last I heard, she had moved to another city. Good riddance. Rich remains out of the picture. According to Trevor, who still keeps me updated on building gossip, he's no longer associated with Cooper and Blackwell in any capacity. Apparently, Craig Cooper wasn't bluffing about taking serious action. As for me, I'm doing better than I expected. The betrayal still hurts when I think about it, but I think about it less often now. I've been focusing on my work, reconnecting with friends I'd neglected during my relationship with Megan, and even started dating again, very casually, very slowly. The experience taught me some painful but valuable lessons. About trust, about paying attention to red flags, about standing up for myself. Most importantly, it taught me that I'm stronger than I thought. I still have the evidence, all of it, stored securely in multiple locations. Not because I plan to use it, but as insurance. And perhaps as a reminder that no matter how carefully people hide their secrets, the truth has a way of coming out. Sometimes when I look out from my balcony at the city view that once seemed like such a blessing, I think about how costly that view really was. Not just in dollars, but in trust, in love, in innocence. Was it worth it? For Megan and Rich, clearly not. Their discount ended up costing them everything. As for me, I paid a different price, the painful education of betrayal. But unlike them, I at least walked away with my integrity intact. And in the end, that's worth more than any apartment, no matter how good the view.